My name is Tyler Brennan, and until that cold Tuesday morning in March, I thought I had everything figured out. I'd been working at Meridian Financial for 8 years, climbing my way up from junior analyst to regional director of client relations. The corner office on the 14th floor had my name on a brass nameplate, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland, and a view that reminded me every day why I'd fought so hard to get there. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Meridian wasn't just any financial firm. Founded in 1987, it had grown into one of the Pacific Northwest's most respected investment companies, managing over $12 billion in assets. The marble lobby, the mahogany conference rooms, the executive dining area, everything screamed success and tradition. I'd spent nearly a decade learning to navigate its corporate culture, building relationships, and proving my worth to the old guard who ran the place. That morning started like any other. I arrived at 7:30, grabbed my usual black coffee from the executive break room, and settled in to review the quarterly performance reports. My team had just closed the biggest client acquisition in the company's history, a pension fund worth $400 million. The numbers were solid, the client was thrilled, and I was already planning how to leverage the success into a promotion to senior director. At exactly 9:15, my assistant Rebecca knocked on my door. She looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for someone who'd been handling corporate drama for 15 years. "Tyler, Marcus wants to see you in his office immediately." Marcus Chen had joined Meridian 6 months earlier as Senior Vice President of Operations, brought in from a competing firm in San Francisco. He was one of those executives who measured success by how many people he could reorganize, restructure, and ultimately remove. In his first quarter, he'd already eliminated 2 departments and streamlined another. The man collected terminations like some people collected vintage wines. His office was on the 16th floor, a testament to minimalist corporate design. Everything was white, black, or chrome. No personal photos, no awards, nothing that suggested a human being actually worked there. Marcus sat behind his glass desk, perfectly pressed suit, not a hair out of place, looking like he'd stepped out of a business magazine article about corporate efficiency. "Tyler, sit down." He didn't look up from his computer screen. "I've been reviewing the organizational structure of your department." Here it comes, I thought. The restructuring speech. I'd heard variations of it from other directors who'd been repositioned under Marcus's leadership. "Your client acquisition numbers are impressive," he continued, still typing. "But I'm concerned about operational efficiency. The 14th floor real estate is premium space, and I need to optimize our footprint." I felt the first cold knot form in my stomach. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were the color of concrete, and about as warm. "Effective immediately, we're moving your office to B1. The basement level has been converted into a perfectly functional workspace. You'll have everything you need: desk, computer, phone line. It's really quite adequate." The words hit me like a physical blow. The basement. In corporate terms, being moved to the basement was one step above being fired. It was where companies put people they wanted to quit voluntarily, where careers went to die slowly and quietly. "Marcus, I just closed the Hartwell Pension Fund. $400 million. That's the biggest, yes, and we appreciate your contribution. But this isn't about performance, Tyler. It's about efficiency. Space allocation. The 14th floor corner office will be converted into a conference room. Much better use of the square footage." I could feel my career slipping away in real time. "Is this negotiable?" "The decision has been made. HR will coordinate the move. I'd suggest starting today." Walking back to my office, my former office, felt surreal. The brass nameplate that had represented 8 years of 18-hour days and sacrificed weekends suddenly looked pathetic. Rebecca was already coordinating with facilities to pack my things. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, and I could see the mixture of sympathy and relief in my colleagues' faces. Sympathy that it was happening to me, relief that it wasn't happening to them. The basement of Meridian Financial was exactly what you'd expect. Concrete floors painted industrial gray, fluorescent lights that hummed constantly, and the persistent smell of cleaning supplies and machine oil. The elevator opened directly into what had obviously been a storage area hastily converted into office space. They'd installed drop ceilings to hide the pipes, but you could still hear the building's mechanical systems groaning and clicking above your head. My new office was actually a converted storage closet. They'd managed to fit a desk, a chair, and a filing cabinet into a space roughly the size of a small bathroom. The walls were painted the same institutional beige as a prison cell, and the single small window looked out onto the building's loading dock where delivery trucks came and went all day, but the worst part wasn't the physical space. It was the isolation. In my previous office, I was constantly connected to the flow of the company. People stopped by with questions, updates, opportunities. The basement felt like corporate exile. My phone rang less frequently. Emails took longer to get responses. It was as if I'd become invisible to the organization I'd spent 8 years serving. For the first few weeks, I tried to maintain normalcy. I showed up early, stayed late, worked on client accounts with the same intensity I'd always brought to the job. But it became increasingly clear that this wasn't a temporary inconvenience. Marcus had effectively neutralized me without having to fire me. Clients started getting routed to other directors. New business opportunities went to teams on higher floors. I was being systematically cut out of the company's operations. The breaking point came 6 weeks later during the quarterly all-hands meeting. These were typically held in the main conference room on the 15th floor, but this time Marcus had decided to use the new conference space on the 14th floor, my former office. I sat in the back, watching him present the quarterly numbers that included my $400 million client acquisition. He didn't mention my name once. The success I'd worked months to achieve was credited to the client relations team and strategic organizational improvements. After the meeting, I found myself standing in the parking garage, looking up at the building where I'd spent the better part of a decade. Meridian Financial rose 22 stories into the Portland sky, all glass and steel and corporate ambition. From where I stood, the basement level was invisible, buried beneath the main entrance and the marble lobby where I used to belong. That night, I went home to my apartment in the Pearl District and did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a bottle of whiskey and really thought about my life. At 34, I'd been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder that I'd never seriously considered what would happen if someone pulled that ladder out from under me. I had savings, a good credit score, and 8 years of experience in financial services. But I also had something else that Marcus Chen didn't know about. During my time at Meridian, I'd been quietly developing relationships throughout Portland's business community. Not just clients, but vendors, contractors, real estate developers, small business owners who needed financial services but couldn't afford Meridian's premium fees. I'd always thought of these connections as networking, relationship building for future opportunities within the company. Now, sitting in my apartment with the city lights stretching out below me, I began to see them as something else entirely. The idea started small, just a whisper of possibility. What if instead of trying to climb back up Meridian's ladder, I built my own? What if the basement office wasn't the end of my career, but the beginning of something bigger? I spent the next 3 days researching commercial real estate in downtown Portland. Office space was expensive, especially in the financial district where credibility mattered as much as location. But then I discovered something interesting. The building directly adjacent to Meridian Financial, a 24-story office tower called the Morrison Center, had been struggling with occupancy. The owner, a development company called Pacific Northwest Properties, was offering competitive lease rates to attract tenants. More importantly, the Morrison Center sat on the same city block as Meridian Financial. In fact, if you looked at the two buildings from above, they formed an L shape, with Morrison's east wing running parallel to Meridian's main structure. The top floors of Morrison actually overlooked Meridian's executive floors. On Friday afternoon, I called in sick and took a tour of available space in the Morrison Center. The building was older than Meridian but well maintained, with character that the sterile corporate environment I'd been working in lacked. The leasing agent, an energetic woman named Sarah Hoffman, showed me several options, but when we reached the 22nd floor, I knew I'd found what I was looking for. The corner unit had floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, hardwood floors, and a view that looked directly down into Meridian Financial's executive floors. From this vantage point, I could see the 14th floor conference room that used to be my office. I could see Marcus Chen's 16th floor window. I could see the entire corporate hierarchy that had just tried to bury me in the basement. This space just became available last month, Sarah explained. The previous tenant was a law firm that relocated to Seattle. It's 1,200 square feet, which is perfect for a small firm or a growing business. What's the lease rate? Given the current market, we're offering it at $38 per square foot annually. That includes utilities and building maintenance. I did the math quickly. It would cost me just over $45,000 a year, manageable, if I could generate enough business to cover it. But this wasn't just about finding office space. This was about making a statement. I'm interested, I said. But I'd need to move quickly. How quickly? Next week. Sarah raised an eyebrow. That's aggressive. Most commercial leases take at least 30 days to process. I can provide references, financial statements, and first and last month's rent. Immediately. I just need to be in this space as soon as possible. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. That weekend, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of returning to the basement office on Monday morning, I would tender my resignation to Meridian Financial and launch my own company. I had enough savings to survive 6 months. Without income, enough business connections to generate clients, and enough anger at Marcus Chen to fuel whatever came next. Sunday night, I drafted my resignation letter. It was brief and professional, giving 2 weeks' notice as required by my employment contract. I didn't mention the basement office, the humiliation, or the way I'd been systematically marginalized. I simply stated that I was pursuing other opportunities and would ensure a smooth transition of my client accounts. Monday morning, I took the elevator to the basement one last time. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune, and the concrete walls seemed to close in around me as I packed the last of my personal items into a cardboard box. My desk was cleared, my computer logged out, my corporate life condensed into a single container that I could carry with one hand. Instead of going to Marcus Chen's office to deliver my resignation in person, I sent it via email and copied HR. Then I did something that felt both terrifying and liberating. I walked out of Meridian Financial for the last time, took the elevator to the parking garage, and drove directly to the Morrison Center. Sarah Hoffman was waiting for me with the lease documents and keys to the 22nd floor corner unit. As I signed my name to the contract, I looked out the window at Meridian Financial rising next to us, and I made a promise to myself. Within 18 months, I would build a company successful enough to look down at Marcus Chen from these windows. I would prove that burying someone in the basement doesn't kill their ambition, it just gives them deeper foundations to build on. The first morning in my new office at the Morrison Center felt like stepping into an alternate universe. Instead of concrete walls and humming fluorescent lights, I was surrounded by natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The hardwood floors creaked slightly under my feet as I set up my laptop on the empty desk I'd purchased over the weekend. Everything smelled like possibility instead of industrial cleaning supplies, but the euphoria of escape quickly gave way to the crushing reality of what I'd actually done. I'd walked away from a steady 6-figure income to sit alone in an empty office with no clients, no employees, and no clear plan beyond proving Marcus Chen wrong. The silence was deafening compared to the constant buzz of activity I'd grown accustomed to at Meridian Financial. My phone had been conspicuously quiet since I'd submitted my resignation. Word travels fast in Portland's financial community, and apparently being demoted to the basement followed by an abrupt departure had raised questions about my professional stability. The first few calls I made to potential clients were polite but non-committal. People were curious about my new venture but reluctant to commit their money to someone who'd just walked away from an established firm. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Walsh, the owner of a small chain of organic cafes called Green Bean Collective, had been trying to get a meeting with someone at Meridian Financial for months. Her business was growing rapidly, but she needed help restructuring her debt and planning for expansion. Meridian's minimum account size had kept her locked out of their services, and smaller firms lacked the expertise she needed. Jennifer had heard through mutual connections that I'd started my own practice. On Wednesday afternoon, she called and asked if I could meet her at one of her locations in the Alberta Arts District. The cafe was exactly what you'd expect from Portland's alternative business scene: exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, local art covering every available surface, and the kind of authentic atmosphere that chain stores spend millions trying to replicate. "I'll be honest with you, Tyler," she said over fair trade coffee that actually tasted like something special. "I heard you left Meridian under unusual circumstances. Some people are saying it wasn't exactly voluntary." I'd prepared for this conversation, but hearing the rumors spoken aloud still stung. The circumstances of my departure don't change my track record. I spent 8 years building client relationships and managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That experience doesn't disappear because of office politics. What kind of office politics? I could have sugarcoated it, spun some corporate speak about seeking new challenges and pursuing entrepreneurial opportunities. Instead, I decided to tell her the truth. The new senior VP decided I was taking up too much valuable real estate on the 14th floor. So he moved my office to the basement storage area and systematically cut me out of new business opportunities. I realized I could either spend the next year slowly suffocating in corporate purgatory, or I could bet on myself and build something new. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "So you're angry?" "I'm motivated." "Good. Angry people work harder, and motivated people get results. What can you do for Green Bean Collective that Meridian Financial couldn't?" Over the next 2 hours, I outlined a comprehensive financial strategy that included debt consolidation, cash flow optimization, and a 5-year expansion plan that could take her from 6 locations to 20. More importantly, I explained how my fee structure would be based on her business's actual needs rather than arbitrary minimums designed to keep smaller clients away. By the time we finished our second round of coffee, Jennifer had agreed to become my first client. The contract was worth $35,000 annually, not enough to sustain a business long term, but enough to prove that my departure from Meridian hadn't destroyed my credibility. More importantly, Green Bean Collective's success story would become the foundation for everything that followed. Within 2 weeks, Jennifer had referred me to 3 other small business owners who were facing similar challenges. Portland's entrepreneurial community was tighter than most people realized, and word of mouth traveled faster than traditional marketing could ever achieve. A boutique hotel owner needed help with seasonal cash flow management. A tech startup required guidance on investor relations and equity structuring. A family-owned manufacturing company was planning succession and needed estate planning services. Each client presented unique challenges that forced me to think creatively and work more efficiently than I'd ever worked at Meridian Financial. Without the resources of a large firm, I had to become expert in areas I'd previously delegated to specialists. I learned to use financial software I'd never touched, researched regulatory requirements I'd taken for granted, and developed presentation skills that could compete with teams of analysts and associates. The real turning point came 6 weeks after I'd started the company. I was working late on a Friday evening, preparing a cash flow analysis for the boutique hotel, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Tyler, this is David Richardson from Richardson Development Group." Richardson was one of Portland's most successful real estate developers, responsible for several major commercial projects including 2 office towers and a mixed-use development in the Pearl District. He'd been a client of Meridian Financial for over a decade, managing a portfolio worth approximately $60 million. "David, what can I do for you? I heard you've started your own firm. Is that true?" "It is. Brennan Financial Consulting launched last month." "Interesting timing. I've been having some concerns about the service level at Meridian recently. My account manager seems to have changed 3 times in the past 6 months, and I'm not getting the attention a portfolio my size deserves. Would you be interested in discussing a potential transition?" My heart started racing, but I kept my voice steady. "I'd be very interested in that conversation." "Good. Can you meet me Monday morning? Say 9 o'clock at my office?" Richardson Development Group occupied the top 2 floors of one of downtown Portland's most prestigious addresses. Their conference room had panoramic views of the Willamette River and Mount Hood beyond, the kind of setting where major deals got made and corporate alliances were forged. David Richardson was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd built a $100 million development empire, confident, direct, and completely unimpressed by corporate hierarchy. "I'm going to be frank with you, Tyler," he said as we sat down at a conference table that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Marcus Chen at Meridian has been more focused on internal politics than client service. My portfolio performance has been acceptable, but I feel like I'm just another account number in their system. I want to work with someone who understands my business and can provide strategic guidance, not just investment management." Over the next hour, Richardson outlined his concerns with increasing detail. Meridian had been slow to respond to market opportunities, conservative to the point of missing profitable ventures, and increasingly focused on large institutional clients at the expense of individual relationships. He'd built his business by taking calculated risks and moving quickly when opportunities presented themselves, but his investment strategy had become increasingly passive under Meridian's management. "What would you do differently?" he asked. I'd spent the weekend preparing for this meeting, but I also knew that Richardson wasn't looking for a presentation. He wanted a conversation between equals, a strategic discussion about how his money could work harder for him. "Your real estate development business gives you insights into market trends that most investors never see," I began. "You know which neighborhoods are about to take off, which commercial properties are undervalued, which infrastructure projects will drive future growth. But your investment portfolio isn't leveraging any of that knowledge." "Go on." "Instead of treating your investment account as separate from your development business, we could integrate them strategically. Real estate investment trusts focused on Pacific Northwest properties, infrastructure bonds tied to projects you're already tracking, equity positions in companies that support your industry. Your business knowledge becomes a competitive advantage instead of unused intelligence." Richardson leaned forward, and I could see the entrepreneur in him responding to the possibility of more active involvement in his investment strategy. "What about risk management? Diversification without stagnation. We maintain your core positions in established markets while allocating a percentage to opportunities that align with your expertise. You're not gambling with your retirement, but you're not letting market knowledge go to waste either. By the end of the meeting, Richardson had agreed to transfer his entire portfolio to Brennan Financial Consulting. The account was worth $63 million, making it larger than every other client I'd ever managed combined. More importantly, it represented credibility that money couldn't buy. If David Richardson trusted me with his family's wealth, other high-net-worth individuals would take notice. The transition process took 3 weeks and required more paperwork than I'd handled in my entire career at Meridian Financial. But when the final transfer was complete, Brennan Financial Consulting had gone from a one-man startup to a legitimate player in Portland's financial services market almost overnight. The psychological impact was even more significant than the financial windfall. Every morning when I arrived at the Morrison Center, I could look across at Meridian Financial and know that I was managing more money than most of their directors. The basement office where Marcus Chin had tried to bury my career felt like ancient history compared to the panoramic views from my 22nd floor windows, but success brought new challenges I hadn't anticipated. Managing a $60 million portfolio required infrastructure I didn't have, compliance systems, reporting capabilities, research resources that I'd taken for granted at a large firm. I spent sleepless nights learning regulatory requirements and building operational processes from scratch. The solution came from another unexpected source. Amanda Foster had been a senior analyst at Meridian Financial until Marcus Chen had restructured her department out of existence 3 weeks after I'd started my new company. She was brilliant, detail-oriented, and looking for an opportunity to prove herself outside the constraints of corporate bureaucracy. "I heard you landed the Richardson account," she said when she called me on a Thursday afternoon. "That's impressive work. It's also more work than one person can handle properly. Are you interested in a conversation about joining the team? I thought you'd never ask." Amanda brought operational expertise that transformed Brennan Financial Consulting from a scrappy startup into a professional operation virtually overnight. She implemented client management systems, established compliance protocols, and created reporting processes that exceeded anything I'd been able to provide individually. More importantly, she understood the financial services industry from an operational perspective that complemented my client relationship strengths. Within 6 months of leaving Meridian Financial, I had 6 employees, 12 major clients, and over $100 million under management. The company had grown beyond my initial vision of proving Marcus Chen wrong. It had become a legitimate business with its own momentum and purpose. The sweet irony wasn't lost on me. Every morning when I arrived at the Morrison Center, I could see directly into the Meridian Financial offices where my former colleagues were still navigating corporate politics and fighting for resources. From my 22nd floor vantage point, the basement where I'd spent those humiliating weeks was invisible, buried beneath the building's main structure like a bad memory that no longer had power over my future. But the real satisfaction came from something more substantial than symbolic revenge. My clients were getting better service, achieving better returns, and building stronger financial foundations than they'd ever experienced with larger firms. Jennifer Walsh had opened 4 new Green Bean Collective locations. David Richardson's portfolio had outperformed market indices by 12%. The boutique hotel owner had expanded into vacation rentals and was considering a second property. Success, I was learning, wasn't just about proving your critics wrong. It was about proving yourself right. 12 months after walking out of Meridian Financial's basement, I was standing in the penthouse conference room of the Morrison Center, looking down at a city that had become my playground rather than my prison. Brennan Financial Consulting now occupied the entire 22nd floor, employed 14 people, and managed just over $200 million in client assets. The transformation had been so rapid that sometimes I had to remind myself it was real. But success in Portland's tight-knit business community doesn't go unnoticed, especially when it comes at the expense of established players. Marcus Chen had been watching my company's growth with increasing concern, and it was about to become personal in ways I hadn't anticipated. The first shot across the bow came on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 1 year after my basement exile. Amanda Foster knocked on my office door with an expression I'd learned to recognize as serious trouble. "We have a problem," she said, closing the door behind her. "I just got off the phone with Janet Morrison at Morrison Industries. They're canceling their contract." Morrison Industries was one of our largest clients, a family-owned manufacturing company that produced specialized components for the aerospace industry. Their account was worth $8 million annually, and more importantly, they'd been one of our earliest success stories. Under our management, their pension fund had grown by 23% while we'd helped them navigate complex regulatory changes in their industry. What reason did they give? That's where it gets interesting. Janet said they'd received a call from Marcus Chen personally, offering to match our fee structure and provide additional services through Meridian's institutional division. He apparently spent an hour on the phone explaining how Brennan Financial was too small to properly service a company of Morrison Industries' complexity. I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach, but this time it was anger rather than fear. Marcus is poaching our clients directly? It gets worse. I've had similar conversations with 3 other clients this week: Pacific Northwest Construction, Cascade Brewing, and Riverside Medical Group. All of them mentioned receiving personal calls from Meridian executives questioning our capabilities and offering preferential terms. This wasn't a random competition. This was a coordinated campaign designed to strangle Brennan Financial Consulting before we could become a serious threat to Meridian's market dominance. Marcus Chen had apparently decided that ignoring my success wasn't sufficient. He needed to destroy it. The irony was that Meridian Financial had never shown interest in these mid-market clients when I was working there. Companies like Morrison Industries and Cascade Brewing were considered too small for their premium services. But now that I'd proven these clients could be highly profitable with the right approach, Marcus wanted them back. Over the next 2 weeks, the assault intensified. Meridian began offering below-market fee structures to any client considering switching to Brennan Financial. They started a rumor campaign suggesting that our rapid growth was unsustainable and that client funds might be at risk with such a young firm. Most damaging, they began questioning my regulatory compliance, suggesting that a one-man operation couldn't possibly meet the sophisticated requirements of modern financial management. The strategy was sophisticated and potentially devastating. Meridian had resources I couldn't match: a compliance department with 12 attorneys, research capabilities that spanned global markets, and relationships with institutional investors that took decades to develop. They were using these advantages like weapons, not to provide better service, but to eliminate competition. But Marcus Chen had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed I would respond the same way I had in the basement, with resignation and retreat. He didn't understand that building Brennan Financial Consulting had changed me fundamentally. I was no longer an employee who could be intimidated by corporate politics. I was an entrepreneur with my own resources, my own relationships, and my own capacity for strategic warfare. The counterattack began with research. I spent 3 days analyzing Meridian Financial's client roster, fee structures, and service delivery capabilities. What I discovered was that Marcus's aggressive expansion strategy had created vulnerabilities throughout their organization. They'd been acquiring clients faster than they could properly service them, leading to decreased satisfaction among their existing base. More importantly, I learned that Meridian's institutional focus had created gaps in their mid-market coverage that extended far beyond Portland. Companies throughout the Pacific Northwest were underserved by financial firms that either lacked sophisticated capabilities or required minimum account sizes that excluded growing businesses. The solution crystallized during a conversation with David Richardson about his latest development project. He was planning a mixed-use complex in Seattle that would require coordination with investors, contractors, and municipal agencies across multiple jurisdictions. The financial complexity was significant, but so was the opportunity for someone who understood both real estate development and investment management. What if we expanded to Seattle? I asked Amanda during our weekly strategy meeting. There are hundreds of businesses there facing the same challenges our Portland clients have dealt with. Mid-market companies that need sophisticated financial services but can't access them through traditional channels. That's a big leap. We'd need physical presence, local relationships, regulatory compliance in Washington state. It's essentially building a second company. Not necessarily. We could partner with established firms that have local presence but lack our service capabilities. Joint ventures that give us access to their client relationships while they benefit from our expertise. The idea evolved rapidly. Instead of trying to compete with Meridian Financial on their terms, we would expand our geographic reach and create a network of partnerships that could deliver comprehensive services across the entire Pacific Northwest region. The goal wasn't just growth. It was to become too large and too well-connected for any single competitor to eliminate. The first partnership came together with surprising speed. Harrison & Associates was a Seattle-based accounting firm that had been struggling to provide investment management services to their high-net-worth clients. Their founder, Robert Harrison, had been referring business to larger firms and watching helplessly as those clients were absorbed into institutional systems that provided minimal personal attention. "We've been looking for a partner like Brennan Financial for 2 years," Robert explained during our first meeting in his Pioneer Square offices. "A firm that's large enough to handle sophisticated portfolios but small enough to maintain personal relationships. Within 6 weeks, we'd established Brennan Financial Northwest, a joint venture that combined Harrison and Associates' local presence with our investment management capabilities. The partnership gave us immediate access to Seattle's business community while providing Harrison's clients with services they'd never been able to access through regional firms, but the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Williams ran a consortium of medical practices throughout Oregon and Washington that collectively employed over 300 physicians. Their group retirement plan was worth $45 million, and they'd been increasingly frustrated with Meridian Financial's impersonal service and cookie-cutter investment options. "We're not just another institutional client," Dr. Williams explained during our initial consultation. "We're healthcare professionals who understand the importance of personalized attention and long-term relationships. When I call Meridian, I get transferred to whoever happens to be available. When my colleagues have questions about their retirement planning, they're directed to generic educational materials instead of getting real answers." The medical consortium contract was worth more than just the immediate revenue. Healthcare professionals form tight networks that extend across state lines and specialty boundaries. Success with one medical group typically leads to referrals throughout the entire community. More importantly, physicians tend to be high-income earners who require sophisticated financial planning services, exactly the type of clients that could sustain our expansion strategy. The signing ceremony took place in the conference room at the Morrison Center, with panoramic views of downtown Portland spreading out behind us. As Dr. Williams signed the contract that would transfer $45 million to Brennan Financial Northwest, I couldn't help but notice that Marcus Chen's office window was visible across the street. He was probably in another meeting, restructuring another department, completely unaware that his former basement exile had just secured the largest client acquisition in Brennan Financial's history. The psychological impact was intoxicating, but the practical implications were even more significant. The medical consortium contract established Brennan Financial Northwest as a legitimate competitor in the Pacific Northwest's financial services market. We were no longer a small Portland firm that could be dismissed or destroyed through targeted pressure campaigns. We were a regional presence with diverse revenue streams and partnerships that extended beyond any single competitor's reach. Marcus Chen's response was swift and predictable. Within days of the announcement, Meridian Financial began a more aggressive campaign targeting our newer clients and questioning our ability to manage the increased volume of business. They hired a public relations firm to plant stories about the risks of working with rapidly growing financial services companies. They reached out to regulatory agencies suggesting that our expansion might indicate compliance issues that warranted investigation, but the landscape had shifted fundamentally. Instead of fighting for survival, we were now competing from a position of strength. When Meridian questioned our capabilities, we could point to a track record of successful client outcomes and partnerships with established firms. When they suggested we were overextended, we could demonstrate operational systems and staffing levels that exceeded industry standards for firms our size. The turning point came during a presentation to the Portland Business Alliance, the city's premier networking organization for executives and entrepreneurs. Marcus Chen had been scheduled to speak about market trends and investment strategies, but I'd been invited to participate in a panel discussion about innovative approaches to financial services. The event was held at the Portland Art Museum, in a modern auditorium that could accommodate nearly 300 business leaders. Marcus spoke first, delivering a polished presentation about global market conditions and Meridian Financial's institutional capabilities. His slides were professionally designed, his data was comprehensive, and his delivery was smooth and confident, but when the panel discussion began, the audience was more interested in practical solutions than theoretical frameworks. Small business owners wanted to know how to navigate cash flow challenges. Real estate developers needed guidance on project financing. Healthcare professionals were concerned about retirement planning in an uncertain regulatory environment. These were exactly the challenges that Brennan Financial Northwest had been solving for our clients every day. Instead of speaking in generalities about market conditions, I could share specific case studies about how we'd helped similar businesses overcome comparable obstacles. Instead of promoting institutional capabilities, I could explain how personalized service and flexible solutions created better outcomes for mid-market clients. The questions came faster than I could answer them. Business cards were exchanged throughout the auditorium. By the time the event ended, I had scheduled follow-up meetings with 12 potential clients and received inquiries about partnership opportunities from firms in Vancouver, Spokane, and San Francisco. Marcus Chen left early, apparently uninterested in the networking reception that followed the presentation. But I stayed until the museum closed, building relationships and exploring opportunities that would fuel the next phase of our expansion. Walking back to the Morrison Center that evening, I realized that something fundamental had changed in the dynamic between Meridian Financial and Brennan Financial Northwest. We were no longer David fighting Goliath. We were two established competitors operating in the same market, each with distinct advantages and client bases. The basement office where my journey had begun felt like ancient history, a reminder of how quickly circumstances could change when you refuse to accept limitations imposed by others. Marcus Chen had tried to bury my career 18 months earlier, but his effort had inadvertently created something much more dangerous to his business than a successful employee ever could have been. He'd created a competitor who understood his weaknesses better than he understood them himself. The call came at 6:30 on a Friday morning, 18 months after I'd first stepped into that basement office. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office, coffee steaming beside my laptop, when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in over a year. Rebecca Martinez, my former assistant at Meridian Financial, was calling from what I assumed was her personal phone. "Tyler, I hope it's okay that I'm calling you directly," she said, her voice carrying a tension I'd never heard during our years working together. "I need to tell you something, but I can't do it from the office." Rebecca had been Marcus Chen's executive assistant since he'd taken over, a position that gave her access to information most employees never saw. What she told me over the next 20 minutes would change everything about my understanding of the war being waged between our companies. "Marcus has been building a file on you since the week you left," she began. "Not just business intelligence, personal information, financial records, client communications, anything he could get his hands on. He's convinced that Brennan Financial Northwest is stealing proprietary information from Meridian, and he's been working legally to build a case." The blood in my veins turned cold. Corporate espionage allegations could destroy my business overnight, regardless of their validity. Even defending against baseless charges would cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees and destroy client confidence. "What kind of case?" "He's claiming that you used confidential client lists to build your business, that Amanda Foster took proprietary research when she left, and that your partnership strategies are based on Meridian's internal planning documents. The legal department has been working on this for months." "Rebecca, you know none of that is true. Every client I've acquired came through independent relationships. Amanda never had access to strategic planning at her level." "I know that, and honestly, most people in the company know it too. But Marcus has convinced the board that Brennan Financial Northwest represents an existential threat to Meridian's market position. He's arguing that if they don't stop you now, you'll eventually take enough market share to seriously damage their business." The irony was breathtaking. Marcus Chen was so threatened by the success of the employee he'd tried to bury that he was willing to risk Meridian's reputation on a legal campaign based on fabricated evidence. But the revelation also clarified something that had been puzzling me for months. The intensity and coordination of Meridian's competitive response had always seemed disproportionate to the actual threat I posed. "Is there anything else I should know?" "There's going to be a board meeting Monday morning where Marcus presents his recommendation to file suit. But Tyler, there's something else. The board isn't just concerned about Brennan Financial Northwest. Marcus's management style has created problems throughout the company. 3 more senior directors have left in the past 6 months, and client satisfaction scores are at an all-time low. Some board members are starting to question whether his approach is sustainable." After Rebecca hung up, I sat in my home office watching the sunrise paint Mount Hood in shades of gold and crimson. The beauty of the morning felt surreal compared to the corporate warfare brewing beneath the surface of Portland's financial district. But along with the threat, Rebecca's information had revealed an opportunity one hadn't recognized. Marcus Chen's aggression wasn't just directed at me, it was destroying Meridian Financial from within. His paranoia about external competition had blinded him to the internal damage his leadership was causing. If I could document that damage and present it effectively, I might be able to turn his assault into his own destruction. The weekend became a marathon research session. Amanda Foster joined me at the Morrison Center, and together we built a comprehensive analysis of Meridian Financial's recent performance. We pulled public filings, industry reports, client satisfaction surveys, and employment records. What emerged was a picture of a company in steep decline masked by short-term revenue gains from aggressive client acquisition. Under Marcus's leadership, Meridian had increased their asset base by 40% while simultaneously losing veteran employees at unprecedented rates. They'd cut operational costs by reducing service levels, leading to client complaints that were being systematically suppressed through legal settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Most tellingly, their fee income per client had dropped significantly, as they'd been forced to offer below-market rates to compete with smaller, more agile firms. "This is a company eating itself alive," Amanda observed as we reviewed the data Sunday evening. Marcus is so focused on eliminating external threats that he's destroying the internal culture that made Meridian successful in the first place. Monday morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 18 months earlier. Instead of waiting for Marcus Chen to attack, I would go on the offensive. But my target wouldn't be Meridian Financial as a company, it would be Marcus Chen as a leader whose toxic management style was destroying a respected institution, the vehicle. For this strategy came through an unexpected channel. James Mitchell, chairman of the Portland Business Development Council, had been observing the competitive dynamics in the financial services sector with growing concern. The council represented major employers throughout the region, and several member companies had been caught in the crossfire between Meridian and Brennan Financial Northwest. This situation is becoming disruptive to the entire business community, James explained during a lunch meeting at the University Club. We've had member companies report being pressured to choose sides, receiving conflicting information about their service providers, and feeling manipulated by tactics that have nothing to do with actual service quality. The council was planning a forum on best practices in financial services, designed to provide member companies with objective information about their options. James invited me to participate as a panelist, along with representatives from other major firms in the region. Marcus Chen had also been invited, creating an opportunity for a direct confrontation in front of Portland's business elite, but I had a different idea. Instead of engaging in another panel discussion that would inevitably become a proxy battle between competing firms, I proposed presenting a case study on sustainable growth in professional services. The presentation would focus on how companies could expand their market presence without destroying their organizational culture or compromising their ethical standards. Essentially, you want to give a presentation about how not to be Marcus Chen without mentioning his name, James said. With a knowing smile. I want to give a presentation about leadership principles that any thoughtful business owner would recognize as important. If the audience draws parallels to current market situations, that's their prerogative. The forum was scheduled for the following Thursday at the Portland Convention Center, with an expected attendance of over 400 business leaders. I spent the intervening days crafting a presentation that would demolish Marcus Chen's leadership approach without appearing to engage in personal attacks. The key was to focus on principles rather than personalities. Instead of criticizing Meridian's recent strategies, I would discuss the importance of employee retention and institutional knowledge. Rather than attacking their client acquisition tactics, I would explore how sustainable growth required maintaining service quality during periods of expansion. Instead of questioning their competitive responses, I would examine how market leaders could respond to new entrants without compromising their own values. Thursday morning arrived with typical Pacific Northwest drizzle, but the Morrison Center buzzed with energy as our entire team prepared for what felt like the most important presentation of my career. Amanda Foster had assembled supporting materials that documented every claim I planned to make. Our newest hire, Jonathan Kim, had created visual presentations that would make complex financial data accessible to a general business audience. The Portland Convention Center's main auditorium was packed beyond capacity, with additional attendees watching from overflow rooms via closed-circuit television. The forum had clearly struck a nerve in the business community, with people hungry for clarity about the changes reshaping their financial services landscape. Marcus Chen arrived with an entourage that included Meridian's head of marketing, their chief compliance officer, and two attorneys I didn't recognize. He took a seat in the front row, directly in my line of sight, making it clear that he intended this to be a personal confrontation. My presentation was scheduled third, after brief remarks from representatives of two national firms that provided context about industry trends. When James Mitchell introduced me, the auditorium fell silent with anticipation. Ladies and gentlemen, Tyler Brennan, founder and CEO of Brennan Financial Northwest. Walking to the podium, I could feel the weight of 18 months of struggle, growth, and determination. The basement office where this journey had begun felt like a lifetime ago, but the lessons learned in that concrete cell had prepared me for this moment. 2 years ago, I learned something important about organizational culture. I began looking directly at Marcus Chen. I learned that how a company treats its people during difficult times reveals more about its character than any mission statement or marketing campaign ever could. For the next 45 minutes, I walked the audience through a masterclass in sustainable business growth that systematically dismantled every aspect of Marcus Chen's leadership philosophy. I discussed the hidden costs of aggressive employee turnover, using industry data that made Meridian's recent patterns unmistakable. I explored how short-term revenue gains achieved through below-market pricing could undermine long-term profitability, citing examples that closely mirrored Meridian's recent client acquisition strategies. Most importantly, I presented a framework for evaluating leadership effectiveness that emphasized collaboration over control, long-term thinking over short-term gains, and ethical competition over destructive warfare. Every principle I articulated was the opposite of Marcus Chen's approach, but I never mentioned his name or directly referenced Meridian Financial. The audience response was immediate and overwhelming. Questions came from every corner of the auditorium, with business owners sharing their own experiences with leadership challenges and competitive pressures. Several people mentioned situations that sounded remarkably similar to recent events. In Portland's financial services sector, when Marcus Chen's turn came to speak, the contrast was stark. His presentation focused on market metrics and institutional capabilities, delivered with the same corporate polish that had impressed audiences for years. But after my discussion of leadership principles and sustainable growth, his approach felt hollow and outdated. More damaging, Marcus made a critical error during the question and answer session. When asked about how established firms should respond to new market entrants, he launched into a thinly veiled attack on smaller competitors that lack the resources and experience to properly serve sophisticated clients. The audience's reaction was immediately negative. These were successful business owners who had built their own companies from small beginnings. Marcus's dismissive attitude toward emerging competitors felt like an attack on their own entrepreneurial success. The coup de grace came during the networking reception that followed the presentations. Business leaders approached me throughout the evening, sharing stories about their own experiences with Meridian Financial and expressing concerns about recent changes in the company's culture. Several mentioned that they'd been considering switching their accounts but hadn't known about alternative options. By the time the reception ended, I had scheduled preliminary meetings with 8 potential clients representing over $60 million in combined assets. More importantly, the business community had seen a clear demonstration of the leadership styles and business philosophies that separated Brennan Financial Northwest from our competitors. Marcus Chen left the convention center early, surrounded by his legal team and looking like a general whose army had just been routed on the battlefield. But the real victory wasn't the immediate business impact, it was the shift in narrative that had occurred in front of Portland's most influential business leaders. The forum had reframed the competitive dynamic between our companies. Instead of an established giant battling a scrappy startup, the audience had seen a contrast between collaborative leadership and authoritarian control, between sustainable growth and destructive expansion, between ethical competition and corporate warfare. Walking back to the Morrison Center that evening, I realized that Marcus Chen's greatest mistake hadn't been moving me to the basement 18 months earlier. His greatest mistake had been underestimating what that experience would teach me about resilience, determination, and the power of building something meaningful from the ground up. The war between our companies was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted decisively. Marcus Chen had spent 18 months trying to destroy what I'd built. Now it was time to show him what I'd learned about winning battles he didn't even know he was fighting. 3 weeks after the Portland Business Development Council Forum, the phone call I'd been expecting finally came. Thomas Hartwell, chairman of the board at Meridian Financial, requested a private meeting at his downtown law offices. The formal tone of his assistant's voice suggested this wasn't a social invitation. Hartwell and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of one of Portland's most prestigious office buildings, with conference rooms that had witnessed some of the city's most significant business deals over the past 4 decades. Thomas Hartwell himself was a legend in Pacific Northwest legal circles, a man who'd built his reputation representing Fortune 500 companies through complex mergers, acquisitions, and regulatory challenges. Walking into his corner office felt like entering a museum of corporate power. The walls were lined with photographs of Hartwell shaking hands with governors, senators, and CEOs whose names appeared regularly in the Wall Street Journal. His desk was positioned to take advantage of panoramic views that stretched from Mount Hood to the Columbia River, a reminder that conversations in this room typically involved decisions affecting thousands of employees and millions of dollars. "Tyler, thank you for coming," Hartwell said, gesturing to a leather chair positioned across from his desk. "I believe you know why we need to talk." At 72, Thomas Hartwell still projected the sharp intelligence and measured confidence that had made him one of Oregon's most successful attorneys. His gray hair was perfectly styled, his suit was obviously custom-tailored, and his handshake conveyed strength without aggression. This was a man accustomed to negotiating from positions of power. "I assume this is about the situation between Brennan Financial Northwest and Meridian Financial," I replied, settling into the chair and maintaining direct eye contact. "The situation, as you diplomatically put it, has reached a point where it's affecting Meridian's ability to function effectively. Marcus Chen has convinced himself that your company represents an existential threat that justifies increasingly aggressive responses. The board is concerned that his obsession with eliminating you is damaging our reputation and our business. This was exactly what Rebecca Martinez had warned me about, but hearing it directly from Meridian's board chairman carried different implications. Hartwell wasn't just acknowledging the problem, he was positioning himself as the solution. What kind of damage are we talking about? Client complaints have increased by 40% since Marcus began his campaign against your firm. We've lost 3 senior directors who cited concerns about the company's direction. Most significantly, we're facing potential regulatory scrutiny over some of Marcus's more aggressive competitive tactics. Hartwell opened a file folder on his desk and removed several documents that he spread between us. The papers included internal emails, client satisfaction surveys, and what appeared to be correspondence from state regulatory agencies. Marcus has been using below-cost pricing to undercut your proposals, which could be interpreted as predatory pricing designed to eliminate competition. He's initiated background investigations on your employees that may violate privacy regulations. Most problematically, he's made statements to potential clients that could be construed as defamatory. I studied the documents, recognizing several situations where Meridian's responses to our business development efforts had seemed disproportionately aggressive. But seeing the pattern documented in official communications was sobering. Why are you showing me this? Because I need you to understand that this situation has consequences extending far beyond your personal conflict with Marcus Chen. Meridian Financial employs over 200 people and manages $12 billion in client assets. The company's reputation took 40 years to build, and Marcus is threatening to destroy it in 18 months. Hartwell leaned back in his chair, studying my reaction to the information he'd shared. The board has decided that changes are necessary. Marcus Chen will be stepping down as Senior Vice President of Operations, effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. After 18 months of strategic warfare, Marcus Chen was being removed not by external pressure but by internal recognition that his leadership had become toxic to the organization he was supposed to protect. What does this mean for the legal action he was planning? There will be no legal action. The board has reviewed his allegations and determined they lack sufficient evidence to justify litigation. More importantly, we've concluded that pursuing such action would likely expose Meridian to countersuit for harassment and defamatory business practices. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with something approaching sympathy. Marcus Chen had destroyed his own career through his obsession with destroying mine. The basement office where he'd tried to bury my ambitions had become the foundation for success that ultimately cost him everything he'd worked to achieve. What happens now? That depends largely on you, Hartwell said, leaning forward. The board recognizes that Brennan Financial Northwest has become a significant player in the Pacific Northwest market. We also acknowledge that much of your success has come from providing services to clients that Meridian had neglected or underserved. He paused, allowing the implications of his words to settle before continuing. We're prepared to offer you a proposition that could benefit both organizations. For the next hour, Thomas Hartwell outlined a merger proposal that would have been unimaginable 18 months earlier. Meridian Financial would acquire Brennan Financial Northwest for a combination of cash and equity that valued my company at $45 million. I would become Senior Vice President of Client Relations, with operational authority over all accounts under $50 million. Amanda Foster and my other key employees would receive comparable positions with significant salary increases and equity participation. The proposal was financially attractive and professionally validating. It would provide immediate liquidity for my ownership stake while offering long-term upside through Meridian's larger platform. Most importantly, it would allow me to implement the client service philosophy that had driven Brennan Financial's success across Meridian's entire mid-market portfolio. But there was something else in Hartwell's proposal that transcended financial considerations. The merger would essentially put me in charge of the market segment that Marcus Chen had dismissed as unworthy of serious attention. The clients he'd ignored would become my responsibility, and the service approach he'd rejected would become Meridian's official strategy. This is a generous offer, I said carefully. But I need to understand the cultural implications. Brennan Financial Northwest has succeeded because we've maintained close relationships with our clients and flexible approaches to their needs. How would those values translate within Meridian's institutional structure? That's exactly why this merger makes sense, Hartwell replied. Marcus's approach was based on the assumption that bigger clients are inherently more profitable than smaller ones. Your success has proven that assumption wrong. Mid-market clients can be extremely profitable when they receive appropriate service levels. The conversation continued through the afternoon, with Hartwell addressing my concerns about operational independence, client retention, and strategic direction. By the time we finished, I had a clear understanding of how the merged organization would function and what my role would be within it. Walking back to the Morrison Center that evening, I found myself processing emotions I hadn't expected. The merger offer represented complete vindication of everything I'd built since leaving Meridian's basement. But it also represented the end of the entrepreneurial journey that had defined my identity for the past 18 months. Amanda Foster was waiting in my office when I arrived, along with Jonathan Kim and 3 other senior employees who'd become the core team driving our expansion. Their faces showed the mixture of anticipation and anxiety that comes with knowing important decisions are being made. "How did it go?" Amanda asked as I settled behind my desk. I spent the next 2 hours walking them through Hartwell's proposal, discussing the financial terms, operational structure, and strategic implications. Their responses varied based on their individual situations and career goals, but everyone recognized that the offer represented an extraordinary outcome for a company that had started in a converted storage closet. "What do you think we should do?" Jonathan asked. It was a question I'd been wrestling with since leaving Hartwell's office. The merger offer was objectively attractive and would provide financial security for everyone involved. But accepting it would also mean acknowledging that independence wasn't sustainable in a market dominated by larger institutions. "I think we should consider what we set out to accomplish when we started this company," I said finally. "Our goal was never just to build a successful business. It was to prove that financial services could be delivered differently, with more personal attention, more flexible solutions, and more genuine partnerships with our clients." Over the weekend, I visited several of our major clients to discuss the merger proposal and its implications for their service. The conversations were revealing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Jennifer Walsh, whose Green Bean Collective had been my first client, was enthusiastic about the possibility of accessing Meridian's resources while maintaining the personal relationship we'd developed. "You've already proven that you can deliver results with limited resources," she said during our meeting at her newest location. "Imagine what you could accomplish with institutional backing and the ability to serve clients across the entire Pacific Northwest." David Richardson had a different perspective that focused on market dynamics and competitive positioning. "The financial services industry is consolidating rapidly," he explained during our meeting at his development office. "Independent firms either grow large enough to compete with institutional players, or they get absorbed by them. Meridian's offer gives you the opportunity to shape that consolidation rather than just surviving it." Dr. Patricia Williams provided the most compelling argument for accepting the merger. "What matters to our medical consortium isn't whether you're independent or part of a larger organization," she said. "What matters is whether you continue to understand our needs and respond to them effectively. If this merger allows you to serve more clients with the same philosophy, then it's good for everyone involved." Monday morning, I called Thomas Hartwell and scheduled a follow-up meeting to negotiate the final terms of the merger agreement. The process took 3 weeks and involved teams of lawyers, accountants, and regulatory specialists, but the fundamental structure remained consistent with Hartwell's original proposal. The announcement was made on a Tuesday morning in late November, almost exactly 2 years after Marcus Chen had first escorted me to that basement office. The press release described the merger as a strategic combination designed to strengthen Meridian Financial's mid-market capabilities while expanding Brennan Financial Northwest's geographic reach, but the real story was visible from my office windows at the Morrison Center. Looking across at Meridian Financial's headquarters, I could see the conference room on the 14th floor that had once been my corner office. The basement level where my exile had begun was invisible from this height, buried beneath the building's main structure like a foundation that had ultimately supported something much larger than anyone had imagined. Marcus Chen's departure from Meridian Financial had been announced quietly the previous week, described as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities. Industry sources suggested he was considering positions with firms in San Francisco or New York, markets where his aggressive style might be better received. I never spoke to Marcus directly about the merger or his departure. But 3 days before the deal closed, I received an unexpected email from his personal account. "Tyler," it read, "I wanted you to know that I respect what you've built with Brennan Financial Northwest. I made mistakes during our time working together, and I'm glad they didn't prevent you from achieving success. I hope the merger serves your clients well." The message was brief and formal, but it represented something I hadn't expected: acknowledgement. From the man who'd tried to destroy my career that his approach had been wrong. The basement office at Meridian Financial was converted back into storage space the week after the merger closed. The drop ceiling tiles were removed, exposing the pipes and mechanical systems that had hummed constantly during my months of exile. The institutional beige paint was covered with industrial gray primer, erasing any evidence that the space had once housed dreams of corporate advancement. But 18 floors above that forgotten basement, I was settling into a corner office with views that stretched across downtown Portland to the mountains beyond. The brass nameplate on my door read, Tyler Brennan, Senior Vice President, Client Relations. The merger had given me authority over a portfolio worth over $300 million and responsibility for client relationships that spanned the entire Pacific Northwest. Marcus Chen had tried to bury my career in a concrete basement. Instead, he'd inadvertently planted the seeds of success that ultimately grew into something larger than either of us had imagined possible. The lesson wasn't about revenge or vindication, it was about resilience and the power of building something meaningful from the ground up. Sometimes the foundation has to be deeper than you planned, but that just makes the structure more solid when you finally reach the top point. 6 months after the merger, I stood in the executive elevator of Meridian Financial, watching the floor numbers climb past the basement level where this story began. The button for B1 was still there, a small reminder of how quickly circumstances could change when you refuse to accept other people's limitations on your potential. The elevator stopped at the 22nd floor, my floor now. As Senior Vice President of Client Relations, I occupied the entire corner of the building that offered the best views in downtown Portland. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided panoramic vistas of the Cascade Mountains to the east and the Coast Range to the west, with the Willamette River threading silver through the urban landscape below, but the most satisfying view was the one looking down at the Morrison Center next door. The 22nd floor office where I'd started Brennan Financial Northwest was now occupied by a technology consulting firm. The empty desk where I'd sat alone 18 months earlier, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, had been replaced by a team of software engineers building apps for local businesses. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent nearly 2 years fighting to prove that I belonged in the upper floors of Portland's financial district, only to discover that my real achievement wasn't reaching the top, it was changing the entire definition of what success looked like in this industry. The transformation at Meridian Financial had been more dramatic than anyone anticipated. Within 3 months of the merger, client satisfaction scores had improved by 35%. Employee retention had stabilized for the first time in 2 years. Most significantly, our mid-market portfolio had grown by 60% as word spread that Meridian was finally providing the personalized service that smaller firms had previously monopolized. The key had been implementing the client relationship philosophy that had driven Brennan Financial's success across a much larger platform. Instead of treating mid-market clients as stepping stones to larger accounts, we positioned them as the foundation of sustainable growth. Account managers were given authority to customize solutions without requiring approval from multiple layers of management. Client communications emphasized partnership rather than vendor relationships. Thomas Hartwell had been vindicated in his assessment that Meridian's future depended on serving underserved market segments more effectively. The revenue from our expanded mid-market division now represented 40% of the firm's total income, compared to 12% before the merger, but the most rewarding aspect of the integration had been watching former Brennan Financial employees thrive within Meridian's larger structure. Amanda Foster had been promoted to Director of Operations, with responsibility for implementing our service delivery model across all of Meridian's regional offices. Jonathan Kim was leading a team of analysts focused on emerging markets throughout the Pacific Northwest. Rebecca Martinez, my former assistant who'd warned me about Marcus Chen's legal strategy, had transferred to my division and was now managing relationships with our largest healthcare clients. The personal relationships that had been the foundation of Brennan Financial's success had scaled seamlessly to accommodate hundreds of additional clients. The difference was that we now had resources to serve them more comprehensively than any independent firm could have managed. The morning of the 6-month anniversary, I received an email that provided closure I hadn't realized I needed. Marcus Chen was writing from San Francisco, where he'd accepted a position as Chief Operating Officer with a boutique investment firm specializing in technology startups. Tyler, his message began, I've been following Meridian's performance since the merger, and I wanted to congratulate you on the results you've achieved. The integration appears to have been remarkably successful, which suggests that your approach to client relations was more sustainable than I initially recognized. The email continued for several paragraphs, providing insights into his new role and the lessons he'd learned from our conflict. But the concluding section was what resonated most deeply. I've had time to reflect on the decisions I made during my tenure at Meridian, and I realize that my response to your success was driven more by personal insecurity than strategic thinking. You represented a different approach to leadership that I felt threatened by, rather than something I could learn from. The basement office assignment was intended to marginalize your influence, but it ultimately forced you to develop capabilities that made you more formidable than you would have been otherwise. I hope you'll accept my apology for the professional difficulties I created, and my admiration for how you transformed those challenges into opportunities. The financial services industry needs more leaders who prioritize long-term relationships over short-term gains. Reading Marcus's apology, I felt a complex mixture of vindication and sympathy. His career had been derailed by the same competitive instincts that had initially made him successful. The aggressive tactics that worked in larger markets had been poorly suited to Portland's relationship-based business culture. More importantly, his downfall illustrated how fear-based leadership ultimately destroys the very success it's designed to protect. Marcus had been so concerned about external threats that he'd created internal dysfunction that proved far more damaging than any competitor could have achieved. The broader implications extended beyond our personal conflict. The merger had demonstrated that sustainable growth in professional services required collaboration rather than conquest, partnership rather than domination. Clients gravitated toward providers who understood their businesses and adapted solutions to their needs, not firms that insisted on rigid service models designed for institutional convenience. That afternoon, I hosted the monthly all-hands meeting for Meridian's client relations division. The conference room was the same space that had once been my corner office, the room where Marcus Chen had announced quarterly results without acknowledging my contributions. Now it served as the operational center for a department that had become the firm's most profitable division. 6 months ago, we committed to proving that mid-market clients could be served as effectively as institutional accounts. I began, addressing the 43 employees who now comprised our team. The results speak for themselves. Client retention is at 94%, new account acquisition has exceeded projections by 40%, and revenue per client has increased by an average of 28%. The numbers were impressive, but the real success story was cultural transformation. Employees who had previously felt constrained by corporate bureaucracy were now empowered to solve client problems creatively. Account managers who had been measured solely on revenue generation were now evaluated on long-term relationship quality. The adversarial dynamic that had characterized interactions between different departments had been replaced by collaborative problem-solving. But statistics only tell part of the story, I continued. What matters more is that we've created an environment where every client feels valued, every employee feels empowered, and every challenge becomes an opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to excellence. After the meeting, I walked through the offices that now house the largest client relations department in Pacific Northwest Financial Services. The cubicles and conference rooms buzzed with activity as account managers coordinated with clients across multiple time zones and industry sectors. The energy was infectious, driven by teams that genuinely believed in the value they were providing. The transformation reminded me of why I'd been drawn to financial services originally. The industry at its best was about helping people and businesses achieve their goals through sound planning and strategic advice. The corporate politics and competitive warfare that had dominated my experience at Meridian under Marcus Chen's leadership had obscured that fundamental purpose, but the merger had restored focus to what actually mattered: client outcomes, employee satisfaction, and sustainable business practices that created value for everyone involved. As evening approached, I found myself alone in my office, reviewing quarterly reports that would be presented to Meridian's board the following week. The numbers told a story of systematic success across every metric that mattered to stakeholders. Client assets under management had grown by 37%. Employee turnover had dropped to industry-leading levels. Profit margins had improved. Despite increased investment in service delivery capabilities, looking out the windows at the city lights beginning to twinkle across Portland's downtown core, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 24 months earlier, I'd been a regional director with dreams of climbing higher in someone else's organization. The basement office had seemed like the end of those aspirations, a humiliating reminder that corporate success often depended more on politics than performance, but exile had forced me to discover capabilities I hadn't known I possessed. Building Brennan Financial Northwest from nothing had required entrepreneurial skills, strategic thinking, and leadership abilities that would never have developed within the comfort of an established corporate structure. More importantly, the experience had taught me that sustainable success came from creating value for others rather than accumulating power for yourself. The clients who had trusted me with their businesses during those uncertain early months had become the foundation for everything that followed. Their success had been my success, and their loyalty had been more valuable than any corporate title or corner office. The basement where Marcus Chen had tried to bury my career had actually provided the foundation for building something larger than either of us had imagined possible. The isolation had forced me to develop independence. The humiliation had motivated me to prove that alternative approaches could be more effective than traditional hierarchies. The resource constraints had taught me to be creative and efficient in ways that served me well when resources became Abundant. 10 floors below my office, the basement level of Meridian Financial was dark and quiet, serving its intended purpose as storage space for records and equipment. The drop ceiling tiles and industrial carpeting that had briefly transformed it into office space were gone, replaced by concrete floors and exposed mechanical systems, but sometimes foundations remain invisible while still supporting everything built above them. The lessons learned during those months of exile continued to inform every decision I made as a leader. The resilience developed during the darkest period of my career had become the source of confidence that enabled me to take calculated risks and pursue ambitious goals. Marcus Chen had intended the basement assignment as punishment designed to force my resignation. Instead, it had become graduate school for entrepreneurship, teaching lessons about perseverance and strategic thinking that no business school curriculum could have provided. The irony was that his attempt to minimize my influence had ultimately maximized it. The merger had given me authority over client relationships worth more than $500 million and responsibility for employees across multiple states. The basement exile had ended with me occupying an office literally above the one Marcus had lost when the board decided his leadership was unsustainable, but the real victory wasn't symbolic or financial, it was philosophical. The client-centered approach that had driven Brennan Financial's success was now being implemented across one of the Pacific Northwest's largest financial services firms. The values that Marcus had dismissed as naive idealism were generating measurable results that validated their effectiveness. As I prepared to leave the office, I took one last look at the view that had become the symbol of my professional resurrection. The Morrison Center next door was mostly dark, with only security lighting illuminating the floors where I'd spent 18 months building something from nothing. The basement of this building was invisible from this height, buried beneath layers of marble lobby and executive offices. But I knew it was there, and I knew what it had taught me. Sometimes you have to go underground before you can reach the top. Sometimes exile becomes education. Sometimes the foundation has to be deeper than you planned, but that just makes the structure more solid when you finally build it. Marcus Chen had moved my office to the basement, convinced that burying my career would solve his competitive problems. Instead, he'd inadvertently provided the perfect foundation for building a company that would eventually rise above everything he'd worked to protect. Looking down at the city spread out below, I realized that the view from the top was spectacular, but the journey from the bottom was what made it meaningful. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe. And hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.